All right, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I know that everyone is super busy, and it is just really exciting for us to be able to share a little bit about our work in this new exciting case, Lighthiser v. Trump. So we're going to start by doing some introductions of Our Children's Trust team and provide a really brief overview. We'll then introduce and have conversations with a few of our special guests today, which I know you're looking forward to. And then we'll talk about next steps, do take a step back, look at how Lighthizer fits into the big picture, and we'll leave some time for some questions and answers. So I'm going to start. My name is Matt Dos Santos. I'm the co-executive director of Our Children's Trust. I work on big picture organizational strategy alongside Julia Olson, the founder of Our Children's Trust. And why don't I just turn it over to you, Julia, to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. And I'm Julia. I'm co-executive director with Matt, and I am chief legal counsel. And in that role, I lead our federal work. And I'll just pass to Andrea real quick.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, I'm Andrea Rodgers. I'm Deputy Director of U.S. Strategy, and I get the pleasure of assisting with litigation in our federal cases. I litigate a number of our state cases, and I'm supporting our Canadian litigation, which is going to trial next year. So look forward to joining you today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Julia.
All right. So I'm going to dive right in and tell you about this incredible new case that we filed called Lighthizer versus Trump. It is a case where we are representing 22 youth, the majority of whom live in Montana, but they also come from California and other states, and Andrea will share more about that. But this case is challenging three executive orders of President Trump, including orders he issued immediately upon taking office on January 20th. The first is the Unleashing American Energy Executive Order, which is really about unleashing fossil fuels. It's about blocking clean renewable energy, and it's about stopping climate science. Okay. The second executive order that we're challenging is where the president declared a national energy emergency in order to assume more power to unleash more fossil fuels. And the third executive order is the one that's focusing on coal and revitalizing the coal industry, which would lead to an expansion of a lot more coal mining, production, and use and export. So we're suing over the constitutionality of all three of these executive orders and trying to stop their implementation. And we're using the Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution and then other provisions of the Constitution that deal with the separation of powers. So the first two claims are about the Fifth Amendment fundamental rights to life and liberty of the youth. And when we think about life, your Constitution says that your government can't act in ways that deprive you of that right. Same with liberty. And what we're doing in this case is really going back to the foundational meaning of life at the time of the founding of the nation and when the Fifth Amendment was drafted. And what life means is not just not being put to death. It means enjoying your earthly existence. It means pursuing happiness and enjoying your full longevity while you're here. So we're bringing that claim. We're also bringing a claim about liberties, and we're using recognized liberties by the Supreme Court. So things like your bodily integrity, personal security, your ability to raise a family safely, and your ability to practice your culture. So all of those things are at issue in this case. And these plaintiffs are already being injured in all of these ways by what the Trump administration is doing. And then the ultra vires claims are this category of constitutional violations that you may have been hearing about in other cases, where the president is assuming more power than he is granted under the Constitution. And in that way, he is ignoring laws that have been on the books for decades about what the Environmental Protection Agency's purpose is, what the NOAA's purpose is, and the really important mandate by Congress that that our executive agencies conduct science, do research, be sort of the shining light of scientific information in the world, and really importantly, that they disseminate that science and that data that our government produces. So there's a lot of violations of law happening here, and this case is really grounded in the Constitution. So we want these executive orders to be declared unconstitutional and not be implemented. And to that end, we moved for a preliminary injunction, and we're trying to put a pause on their implementation right now during the pendency of the case. And so you'll hear a little bit more about that. But what's really exciting is we have a 2-day hearing to present evidence coming up in Missoula, Montana on September 16th and 17th. And we'll be presenting evidence from some of our witnesses, some who are here today, and others, and arguing before the court why these executive orders are unconstitutional and should be enjoined. The other big news that I'll just touch on, and then we're going to move on to some of our guests, is 2 days ago, a coalition of states, Republican-led states, 19 of them, along with the territory of Guam, have moved to intervene in the case. They want to help President Trump and his administration defend the case. And it's really important because this is the only case of all the cases that have been filed against Trump since he took office the second time, where states are intervening like this to try to stop the executive orders from being enjoined. So it shows you the power of the case, and it shows you the power of the fossil fuel interests that they're trying to keep that unleashing in place. So I will stop there with that brief introduction.
Thank you, Julia. It's a pleasure to see everybody again. I am delighted to be able to introduce you to Dr. Lori Byron. Dr. Byron is a pediatrician in Billings, Montana, who focuses on environmental health issues that are affecting our children. Dr. Byron serves on the executive committee of the Environmental Health Council at the American Academy of Pediatrics, where she leads grassroots efforts with pediatrician climate advocates across all 59 AAP chapters. She was incredible as an expert witness in our landmark Held versus Montana trial, where she testified live in open court, and she also serves as an expert in Lighthiser v. Trump, drafting a declaration in support of the motion for preliminary injunction that Julia just talked about. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Byron. I wanted to talk a little bit about, the plaintiffs in the case argue about that the executive orders violate their constitutional right to life by endangering their health. From a pediatric perspective, how do actions that quote unquote unleash fossil fuel pollution and suppress access to climate science data specifically threaten children's health?
Well, expanding fossil fuel production, even without considering the worsening of climate change that will also ensue, have enormous health effects on kids. Combustion of fossil fuels creates particulate matter, little pieces of dust in the air, but many of our preterm births are due to this particulate matter in the air that their mothers breathe. And when their mothers breathe this particulate matter, the babies are more likely to suffer neurocognitive deficits like autism and attention deficit disorder and other learning disorders. And then as kids start breathing air on their own that has particulate matter in it, that particulate matter is associated with some cancers and obesity and diabetes, and of course, lung and heart disease. So burning fossil fuels also puts heavy metals in the air like lead and mercury and arsenic, and these all have wicked reproductions when our kids breathe them and drink them.
Thank you. These executive orders, set federal policy for the nation, and you work directly with patients in Montana. So how will these executive orders directly impact the health of the children that you see and treat in your practice?
Well, I currently only practice inpatient medicine these days. And so the largest effects from climate change that I currently see are the kids in the ER. And their sense of despair is no doubt increasing. I can't go through a 12-hour night shift without seeing at least one child who has attempted suicide. When I talk with them, I find that angst over the world and climate change is a frequent cause of their distress and their suicide attempt. Research indicates that the majority of youth are worried about climate. Large percentage of them don't even plan on having children because of this. And of those who are worried, most of them don't think that adults and governments are protecting them enough.
And these executive orders direct agencies to suppress climate science and data and cancel a tremendous amount of scientific research that had already been funded. How does losing access to federal climate and health data and new research that is ongoing, how does that affect pediatricians' ability to treat their children nationwide? And really, what does this mean for evidence-based decision making into the future?
Well, the classic one is the extreme weather and the dismantling of NOAA that also affects the National Weather Service. With less ability to predict the path of a hurricane or the severity of a storm, we're going to see more traumatized kids. We're going to see more deaths. Think of the tragedy at Camp Mystic and all along the Guadalupe River last year. It was an event made much more likely by climate change. And we will see these catastrophes happen more often and um, stretch or overstretch the healthcare system when they do happen. And then also the recovery will be much more painful for families and children with the downsizing of FEMA and other agencies. But it's not just pediatricians, it's the public health personnel and disaster and emergency response people, the firefighters and camp counselors and teachers. We'll all have our hands tied, and that'll affect the health and the lives of the kids.
Yeah. As a practicing pediatrician and climate health expert who prepared a declaration in support of the preliminary injunction, why is immediate injunctive relief necessary to stop these executive orders? Why is it medically critical at this point in time?
Well, first, we're quickly losing the knowledgeable people that have spent careers of service in these agencies. We used to call it, when I worked with Indian Health Service for my career, the people who knew how to get things done. So many of the people with institutional knowledge are being let go or choosing to leave due to untenable circumstances. And what's left is understaffing, or where people can't do their jobs well. And so the longer that these orders stay in place, the more damage they do to these agencies that actually are designed and do protect the health of our kids. We argued, all the experts in the Health versus the state of Montana 2 years ago argued that every ton of CO2 matters, and that still holds. Every bit of additional greenhouse gas in the atmosphere just worsens the clean and healthful environment that our children and our youth deserve.
Thank you, Dr. Byron. We really appreciate you joining us. We really appreciate your support for the plaintiffs in this case and for children all around the world. I'd like to shift talking about some of the plaintiffs in this case, and you'll get to meet two of them, which I know is some of your favorite opportunities with our Children's Trust, is getting to directly hear from the plaintiffs. So you'll get to do that shortly. The plaintiffs in this case, they're 22 young people ages 7 to 25 from the great states of Montana, Hawaii, Oregon, California, and Florida. They are students, ranchers, scientists in training, artists, educators, leaders who are already experiencing a variety of different climate harms that the executive orders are making worse. Wildfire and hurricane evacuations, water shortages, health injuries, lost property value, climate-related trauma, lost access to vital climate resources, inability to access scientific documents that are critical for their educational understanding, as well as to protect themselves from harm. So some of our plaintiffs are veterans and have been plaintiffs in previous cases. Others have learned about us through their own advocacy, and even others were connected to us through other partner organizations. I think what they have in common is that they are all change makers in their own ways and incredibly courageous individuals who have decided to speak up for their rights and for their own futures during these really difficult times. We provide our plaintiffs with legal representation and holistic trauma-informed support throughout the entire litigation process, because we know both the climate crisis and the judicial system can be traumatic. Today, we're delighted to be able to welcome two of our plaintiffs in this case to share their stories and perspectives in their own words. So welcome, Joseph, welcome, Eva, and I'm going to turn it over to Julia, who's going to have a conversation with Joseph. Thank you.
Hi, Joseph. Thank you for being here. And To everyone, Joseph is 19 years old. He comes to us from Southern California, and we are so lucky that Joseph reached out to us this spring, wanting to get involved and was able to become a plaintiff in Lighthiser. So, welcome. And Joseph, just to start off so people can hear a little bit of your story, what made you decide to take this extraordinary step of joining this case and becoming a plaintiff?
Yeah, that's a good question. My journey with recognizing the importance of the climate crisis wasn't through educational enlightenment. It was something that was thrust upon me since I was born. Growing up in the suburbs of Torrance, California, I didn't really understand why I had to grow up with a butyrol inhaler and diagnosed with asthma at the age of 3 when there was an active oil refinery just 4 miles away from where I lived, pumping billions of oil barrels annually and several tens of active and abandoned oil wells just near my home. Just having to live and reconcile with that reality of living with this debilitating condition where people would stare at me in the cafeteria, why I'd had to carry this inhaler because my lungs couldn't support myself. At that point, the climate crisis still didn't permeate through my very young brain, but I knew that something was wrong. Fast forward, when I was 5, I moved all the way across the country. It was just light and day living in the Appalachians of North Carolina. That's where I fostered and grew my love of nature. My backyard was my big forest playground. I would just go and frolic around with the trees. Um, Go to Barnes and Nobles and buy my Simon and Schuster's Guide to Mushrooms, and I can still identify like 23 species off the top of my head, and just really nurtured this strong love of nature. I think it was in second grade when my teacher decided to hand me this article about global warming. It was a really simple article. It just says the world is warming due to human activity, and in a few years, the thing that I have enjoyed for the past few years in my backyard, just the luxury of trees and playing around with nature, that could have been taken away from me. And I was only 6 or 7 at that time, and to just deal with that reality was honestly so heartbreaking, but it was such fundamentally ingrained into my mind that this is something I should be fighting for. Living in North Carolina, while there was that side of just playing around in nature, there was the other side of me um, getting used to and desensitized to these flash flood warnings and all of these warnings moving all the way across back to California when I was around 8. Um, Same thing in North Carolina, getting desensitized to all these uh, drought advisories and all these wildfires. The 2018 Mendocino fires, where just smoke was coming all the way through. And then 12, there's a common theme of me moving everywhere across the country and across the Pacific Ocean. I moved to South Korea. And through there, my advocacy for the environment just kind of blossomed into something that I realized and recognized that this is genuinely something that I need to dedicate my career, or more than just my career, my livelihood to. Um, at 8th grade, I organized the school walkout when the Brazilian wildfires were happening at around 2019, 2020. And just my deeply ingrained compassion and empathy for things that are going around related to the environment just grew. But also, just living in Korea was such a stark dichotomy, this industrialized sprawl of the cities and pollution compared to this Appalachian forest heaven that I lived in North Carolina and parts of Northern California. It was just a stark reality. This is what our future could be headed towards if we didn't do anything. And, it's so easy to get stuck into this loophole of political apathy. But when I found out, I think it was in December, that Held v. Montana recently won its major statewide victory, where at the highest court, the Supreme Court in Montana guaranteed that all Montanans should be guaranteed this right to a livable future. That instilled this sense of hope that we could use the judicial system to make some fighting change to guarantee a right for a future that we can just not survive in, but thrive in. I was like, sign me up. Never heard of Our Children's Trust until then. Went to the website and I signed up to be youth plaintiff. Here I am now.
Well, we're so grateful for that journey you've been on, Joseph, and that it has had you cross our paths. So thanks again so much for reaching out. Um, I wanted to ask you to just share, if you could, what what effects from climate change have been really personal to you, and if you could share an experience and what it means for you to have more fossil fuel pollution and more climate change occurring in your life.
Yeah, you know, as the years went on, you kind of get desensitized to these stories on news and all of that, hearing of people going to the ER with heat strokes and just heat waves just getting more intense and severe by the year. It didn't really that, all of these stories didn't really have a grasp on me until around summer of 2023. It was in July, I was in Korea, and we had one of the worst heat waves of the year. I honestly did not anticipate the heat getting this bad. And so I just decided to go out for a walk. And, while I was walking just 30 minutes in, I stopped sweating, which was unusual. Then I became a little dizzy. That dizziness was a different level of dizziness to the point where I just, kind of lost consciousness and, my vision became all blurry. And then I collapsed on the floor. I didn't know exactly what happened next, but I was rushed by the ambulance to my general hospital where I had a tube surgically inserted down my throat to support my lungs, which were on the brink of organ failure. I was intubated and admitted for 3 days. There I learned I got heat stroke. To learn that my life was on the verge of death and to hear that the government just considers stories like mine reduced to mere statistics and that they would tout their GDP numbers over our own livelihoods is not only an insult, but it's incredibly infuriating and it's just so disheartening, which is just why further invigorating me onto why I'm on this case. It's honestly really difficult for me to share these stories, but I think sharing them is what's going to move the needle ultimately to make sure that people in the future don't have to go through what I went through.
Thanks for sharing that, Joseph. And you and I have shared conversation before about that story, and I know what it means to, call that up. And so I just want to acknowledge that and thank you because it is important. It's important for people to understand the deeply personal nature of what heat does to a young person's body in particular. And it's why people like Dr. Lori Byron are so critical because the combination of your story and Dr. Byron's story in a courtroom can really get at the heart of why the right to life is at stake. So just if, Matt, do we have one more minute? Can I ask Joseph one final question?
Yep.
Um, uh, to just turn it a little bit to the hope that you talked about, what would the world look like and feel like to you if your rights to life and liberty were actually protected through a court order?
A world where if this case were not only to secure one of the biggest climate victories and set one of those most powerful judicial precedents in court, but also to secure my right to a livable future, for me, that would just mean that none of our future generations would have to go through what I'd have to go through. None of the future generations would have to go through years of climate harm and unpredictability through natural disasters, intensifying heat waves, and visits to the emergency room where their life is under peril. To me, it means that we're just not only surviving, but having the ability to thrive. And as someone who wants to have children in the future, I want to make sure that my own children don't go through what I had to go through and that they live in a future that's unburdened by what has to come with everything that comes with the climate crisis.
Thanks so much, Joseph, for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. Now, Eva is our lead named plaintiff in Lighthiser v. Trump, hailing from Montana, where she was one of the plaintiffs in the landmark Held v. State of Montana case and just was hungry for more. So, Eva, can you share really what was the first inspiration to get you to start advocating for the climate and your future? Was there a particular moment in your life that made you think, I need to take action? And how did you become involved with Our Children's Trust?
Well, thank you all so much for being here today. And to answer your question, having grown up in Montana, there was a large emphasis on my natural surroundings throughout the course of my life. And as a younger kid, I began to notice trends where, in the summertime, the sky would be permeated with wildfire smoke throughout the summer. And we kept having sporadic flooding events due to, either high runoff in strange times of the year or insanely heavy rainstorms following, a very dry period. And seeing firsthand, these different impacts, whether that's on the wildlife, the landscape, or even in my own community, those were really kind of wake-up calls for me. And, a flooding event I did experience when I was probably 11 or 12 was a major factor in my family relocating. I also, I live in a town that borders a river that flooded really severely a couple years ago, and it was an incredibly stressful time because a lot of the town went underwater, and we did not have any of the infrastructure in place to take care of the city and the aftermath. Because, a small rural community doesn't have the funding or necessary infrastructure to take care of people and their homes and businesses after a disastrous event. When I was 9, I spoke at this solar rally, and it was a really, really inspiring moment for me because we were all in the Montana State Capitol, and we were speaking and advocating for something that we all cared about and believed in. And that was a big moment for me and an inspiring moment for me because I saw the real power kind of behind, collective activism and working together towards a common goal. So when I heard about Our Children's Trust originally back in 2020, I was really inspired to join Help Montana because I wanted to find a way to take action. And, I had a lot of climate anxiety, and climate was something I was consistently worried about and stressed about. And I have been anxious and uncertain about my future for a very long time. So when the opportunity came for me to take action and be involved in that case, I jumped on it.
Yeah, the Held v. Montana victory was truly historic. And, but taking on your government in court can be scary and it requires incredible courage. So, what surprised you most about your experience in that case? And what lessons or confidences are you carrying forward with you as you go forward in this case against the federal government?
The biggest lesson I'm carrying forward with me from the Held v. Montana case is just learning the power behind youth voices. When I originally joined the case, I think I had a lot of imposter syndrome and I was really nervous about using my voice. I was incredibly anxious about testifying in court, about speaking with media or speaking on panels such as these. And I was I think, in a way, I wasn't confident in my voice. But, it's really helped me to use my voice, and I've seen, the impacts of all of us using our voices together. The Held victory was a major precedent, and it was a really incredible thing to be a part of. And I think, moving forward in this case, knowing the power of young voices and what we can do when we take action is a really, really powerful thing. This current administration is attacking the climate in so many ways. And right now, it is absolutely necessary that we take action, that we speak up. As young people, a lot of us in this case, we can't vote. So it's, I think, absolutely essential that we take this fight to the courts.
And what would you want supporters who are watching today to know? What would you like to leave folks with?
I think as young people, we're incredibly invested in this fight because our futures are at stake. We're inheriting something very uncertain and very frightening. But I also think it's really important to remember that people of all ages can get involved in this and speak up and take action. It's a lot of pressure on young people's shoulders to have to kind of bear the weight of the climate crisis and our futures at the same time. So I think as if I had a message to especially the older generations, you have the resources, the connections, the money and a lot of capabilities that we as young people may not have as much of. And you can use that and really aid us all in this fight.
Thank you so much, Eva. It's an honor to work with you in partnership at our Children's Trust. We deeply appreciate you being here today and your participation in the case as well. So we're going to take a little bit of a step back and talk about energy and the legal claims behind the executive order. So I'm going to turn it back over to Julia. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Eva and Joseph. Hi, Mark. I'm delighted, everyone, to introduce you to Dr. Mark Jacobson. Mark is the professor of civil and environmental engineering at Stanford University and director of its atmosphere energy program. But importantly, Mark has been a leading expert in this field of the transition away from fossil fuels and the viability of clean, renewable energy to power everything, everywhere, for longer than anyone else. And we're really fortunate that Mark has been really supporting the work of our Children's Trust and providing his expertise since almost the beginning, and in a multitude of cases, including Held and including our Navahine versus Hawaii case, and Juliana. So Mark, thank you so much for being here. And
thanks for having me here, Julia. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So my first question for you is, our president has declared a national energy emergency to justify the executive orders and justify the unleashing of more fossil fuels. Based on your extensive decades-long energy research and modeling, is there actually an energy emergency in the United States? And if not, can you walk us through that, please?
Thanks. No, there is no energy emergency in the United States. The United States is blessed with the best clean renewable energy resources in the world. We have an abundance of solar, abundance of offshore and onshore wind. We have an abundance of geothermal, both conventional geothermal and what's called enhanced or deep geothermal, and also huge hydroelectric resources. I mean, there's no country that has a combination of all these resources like the United States. And the United States can easily be powered with all of these resources. And we know that because China, for example, which uses more energy than the United States right now, like 50% more energy, and is projected to use almost 3 times as much energy as the United States by 2050, is already transitioning to 100% renewable energy, and they have fewer resources, less land area. And in fact, they're on track. Just this year alone, they've put up like 6% of all, 5 to 6% of all the energy they need to transition to 100% renewable energy. Well, they will by the end of this year. In the first 5 months, they did 5/12 of that. And so they will be 100% renewable across all energy sectors if they continue going at the same pace as this year by 2038. The United States is slower and won't reach 100% renewable at its current pace until 2080 to 2100. So, if you put your mind to it, you can transition. We do not need fossil fuels. We do not want fossil fuels because fossil fuels cause significant health damage, climate damage, more land requirements than clean renewable energy, create fewer jobs. So you lose jobs by going to fossil fuels versus renewable energy. There's just really no benefit, and it can cost consumers a lot more. So there's no energy emergency, except we're using the wrong kind of energy mostly right now, and we need to go to clean renewable energy.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When we started this work, the US was using about 80% fossil fuels, and it really hasn't shifted all that much, right? And we're now the biggest oil and gas producer in the world, and we export a lot of that. So can you just talk us through, Mark, when we talk about transitioning to 100% renewable energy using wind, water, and solar, why is it technically and economically feasible to do that by or earlier than 2050? And then can you talk about the economics of that compared to using fossil fuels?
Yeah, well, what it really entails is we want to electrify everything. I mean, from my point of view, we're looking at addressing 3 major problems. It's air pollution, which causes about up to 100,000 premature deaths in the United States each year, global warming, and energy insecurity. And the solution to that, these problems all arise due to combustion fuels, mostly fossil fuels, but also some bioenergy fuels. And we need to get rid of combustion and go to electrification. So we want to electrify as much as possible. If we think of energy as four major sectors: electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry. For transportation, we want to go to battery electric vehicles and some hydrogen fuel cell electric for long distance heavy transport. For buildings, we want to get rid of gas in buildings, go to electric heat pumps, electric induction cooktops, LED lights. Electric induction cooktops use 60% less energy than gas. Electric heat pumps use 75% less energy than gas to provide the same heating. So you use a lot less energy if you electrify. And then in industry, we want to go to high temperature electric production of high temperatures through electric arc furnaces, induction furnaces, resistance furnaces, dielectric heaters, electron beam heaters, heat pumps. And also there are what are called fire bricks where you can store heat up to 2000 degrees and you can produce that heat from intermittent wind and solar. So we have all the technologies we need virtually to go to 100% renewable. We're going to power the electricity primarily, well, all by onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and in power plants, concentrated solar power, geothermal electricity, some geothermal heat, and then also hydroelectricity primarily. And so we have those technologies, we have the land areas. We would need on the order of 1% of US land, which is less than right now. The fossil fuel industry occupies 1.3% of US land. Another 1.24% of US land is occupied by corn, just for ethanol production, and ethanol only supplies 4% of US transportation fuel. So we'd go down from 2.5% of US land used for energy to around 1%. So less land. We create hundreds, in fact, over 2 million more long-term full-time jobs than lost. And we would save consumers money, not only because we use on the order of 60% less energy, 55 to 60% less energy with electric world powered by wind, water, and solar, but the cost per unit energy of wind, solar, geothermal, and hydro is less worldwide than fossil fuels. And so we have a 60% reduction of the annual energy costs. So people will save huge amounts of money by going to clean renewable energy. And on top of that, we save health costs and we save climate costs. So there's like a 60% reduction of energy costs and 90% reduction of what's called social costs going to clean renewable energy. There's really no benefit of not doing it, and it's just a disbenefit.
Yeah, and one of the things you told me that was impactful is states that are using more renewable energy to power their electricity grid, those consumers are paying less for energy than the fossil fuel dependent states. Is that right?
Yeah, what's really interesting, there are 11 states now that produce, in terms of the electric power sector, produce 50 to 122% of their demand with just wind, water, and solar. And you wouldn't believe who's on top, but South Dakota. They produce in 2024, well, second quarter of 2024 to the first quarter of 2025, they produce 120, 122% of their electricity demand with just wind, water, solar. It was about 80% wind, about 30% hydro, and about 2 to 3% of solar. And of those 11 states that go from 50 to 122%, 10 of those 11 states have electricity prices at least 1.9 cents per kilowatt hour below the US average of 16 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's a myth that renewables make electricity prices more expensive. In fact, what we're seeing is that you have lower electricity prices with more renewables. People point to California, which is actually number 12 on that list, as having high renewables, and high prices as well. And first of all, the amount of renewables in California is closer to 50%. It's not, so that's why it's number 12. But the reason we have high prices in California has nothing to do with the renewables. It has to do with, first of all, fossil gas in California is the second or third highest in the US. We've had to pay for wildfires caused by transmission line sparks, multiple wire every year for the last 6 years or so. There have been wildfires and that cause huge damage, and that cost is passed on to consumers. The Aliso Canyon and San Bruno gas disasters, those costs were passed on to consumers. The need to strengthen underground gas lines, those costs are due to San Bruno, those costs were passed on to consumers. The need to strengthen, put underground transmission lines to stop fires, those costs were passed on to consumers. Keeping Diablo Canyon nuclear open, those costs are passed on to consumers. So we have all these reasons that electricity prices are higher that have nothing to do with the increase of renewables. It has to do with the maintenance of the current fossil fuel and nuclear industry and
Right.
infrastructure.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through that. So I want to switch a bit to the preliminary injunction. You submitted an expert declaration really explaining to the court why this idea that we're in an energy emergency is false. We're actually in a climate emergency. And we're seeking immediate relief. And so I just was hoping you could explain to people why the timeline is so critical and why blocking renewable energy today and why unleashing fossil fuel energy today really causes some irreparable harm and sets us back. So just wondering if you can walk us through that a little bit, Mark.
Yeah, we need to transition immediately. In fact, yesterday, for three main reasons. I mean, there's air pollution, which causes, as I mentioned, up to 100,000 premature deaths in the United States alone, and 7.4 million deaths worldwide each year, caused from fossil fuel, mostly particles, but also some gases. And so every year we delay a transition to renewable energy. Every year we continue the use of fossil fuels and bioenergy fuels for energy. We're going to keep causing these premature deaths. And so that's one reason. Climate is a second reason, and it's growing in importance, but we need to solve 80% of the climate problem within 5 years and 100% within 10 to 15 years in order to avoid much more than the 1.5 degrees global warming we've seen since the 1850 to 1900 period, pretty much already. And so we have to minimize that damage, and that's the only way is to transition immediately. So if we continue fossil fuels, that will just delay the transition, keep causing all the damage that's occurring due to global warming that we're seeing every day, including the floods in Texas, which were enhanced by global warming, in addition to cuts that cause the warning systems and warnings to be reduced. And the third problem is energy insecurity. I mean, there are multiple types of energy insecurity problems, but one is the fact that fossil fuels will run out at some point, and that will result in energy price instability, economic instability, social instability, and political instability. And so the longer we delay in transitioning, the more risk there is of total political instability in many countries, including the US, if we have reduced the amount of available fossil fuels and you don't have an alternative in place. There's also the fact that some countries depend on other countries for fossil fuels, and you have to ship those fossil fuels over a long distance. And even in the US, we have that same issue. Like in Hawaii, for example, has the highest electricity prices in the US because fossil fuels have to be shipped across the ocean. Why can't they just produce their own energy from clean, renewable sources instead of having that electric energy shipped? And there are also other types of energy insecurity factor when you have centralized power plants. When they go down, they cause massive disruption to grids, whereas wind and solar are distributed. And if a wind turbine goes down, or a few wind turbines go down, or solar panels go down, you do not disrupt the entire grid. And it's much safer, cleaner, and more reliable for everybody to have clean renewable energy plus storage, which I didn't talk about, but we need storage as well. So this whole system, it's cheaper, creates more jobs, uses less land, saves consumers money, and is healthier and reduces climate damage. So it's the only way to go in the future.
I'm sold. That's a given, but I'm wondering just in the last minute, and then we need to wrap up. What is the biggest false narrative, or if there's a couple of false narratives that you deal with all the time that you just want to correct and emphasize for folks?
Well, I want to point out that we need to focus on the solution, and there are a lot of false solutions being promoted. 4 of them are being promoted by the fossil fuel industry. These include carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, and electrofuels. These are all constructs of the fossil fuel industry that do nothing to help solve our problems. Then the agricultural industry is also pushing biofuels and biomass, including what's called sustainable aviation fuel. These are false solutions that do not help at all. They're greenwashing. And then nuclear, while better than some technologies, it's just not going to help one bit, because not only because of the fact that it takes so long to build, 12 to 23 years worldwide, and in North America and Europe, it's 17 to 23 years. So it has no hope of helping solve climate or air pollution problems. And this applies to small modular reactors as well. But the costs are also way higher. They're like in the US, they're like 16 times the capital cost per kilowatt as new solar or wind for new nuclear. And in terms of cost per unit energy, about 3 to 8 times. So why would you wait so long for something that costs so much? You're just delaying a solution. And on top of that, you've got weapons proliferation problems, meltdown risk. You have to get rid of the waste or store the waste for hundreds of thousands of years. You have uranium mining, underground uranium mining, lung cancer risk, and it's not carbon free. It's 9 to 37 times the carbon equivalent emissions as wind. So we need to keep our eye on the ball and focus on true solutions and solutions that can be implemented quickly at low cost and have the maximum benefit in terms of health, jobs, land use, and our clean, renewable, reliable energy future.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks for everything you do for our children's trust and all of these plaintiffs. We're grateful.
Thank you, Julia.
Yeah. All right. So I think I'm still up to just briefly touch on what's coming next. And there's a lot of work ahead. So we're responding to the 19 states plus the territory of Guam who want to come in as interveners in the case. That's coming up in the next couple of weeks. This coming week, we will be responding to the government's response to our request for a preliminary injunction. So we get their papers on Friday, and we'll see if they have any evidence and if they have any witnesses that they will put forward in response to our host of experts, former government employees, and plaintiff witnesses. So that will be coming, and our response is due a week later. So it's a really steep schedule, and all the while we're preparing to gear up for this mini trial that will happen on September 16th and 17th in Missoula, Montana, and we'll need all of you and all of your amazing support as we head towards that. And I think during the Q&A, we'll talk a little bit about some of the questions I've seen coming up in the chat about recent Supreme Court decisions and how this case differs from Juliana. So I think I'll pause there, Matt, and turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Julia. And again, just thank you to all of our special guests who presented. I got goosebumps listening to you talk, and I saw like folks were chattering and responding to the amazing information you provided. So thank you so much. So for the next big moment for us, for those of you who are on the East Coast or who want to travel to Washington, D.C., we're going to be in D.C. next week, meeting with members of Congress about the urgent need to stop Trump's unlawful executive orders. And on Wednesday, July 16th, so next Wednesday at noon Eastern, we'll be holding a press conference with youth plaintiffs and rally at the U.S. Capitol. We hope that some of you can join us there to stand with the youth plaintiffs and the various members of Congress who are stepping up to support them. And I just want to take a step back for context. This case, right, Lighthiser v. Trump, it's a critical next step in our long-term strategy to use the courts to enforce government's constitutional and public trust obligations to protect our climate. It's building on landmark wins like the ones we had in Montana and Hawaii, but it goes further, right? Because it takes on not just the climate harms, but the systemic failures in governance that we're seeing happening around us that we know are driving them, and that frankly are at the heart of some of the most problematic things we're seeing with our democracy. So I think from hearing from Joseph and Eva, you get the sense that this is more than just a case. It's more than just a legal strategy, but it's a movement strategy. It's grounded in youth leadership. It's supported by a broad coalition of allies. And together with all of you, we're moving public opinion. We're engaging congressional champions, and we're ensuring that courts hear young people's demands. And it's at its heart, right? It's this fundamental demand for a constitutional right to a livable climate. All of our strategy, whether we're in Montana, Hawaii, or here at the federal level, we're pairing our litigation with these public engagement campaigns where we uplift youth voices, we expose government misconduct, and we're really trying to shift the public narrative towards climate justice, towards science, and really towards hope, which I saw a lot of you talking about. To do this well, we need to raise a lot of money. For this particular case, we're trying to raise at least $1 million for both the legal and communications campaigns. And thanks to a couple of generous donors, we've already raised $50,000 in matching funds. So for every donation that you all can give now, your impact is going to be doubled. And just to be very clear about it, the donations that we get today and in support of Lighthiser support this powerful team of experts. It supports our legal team who are bringing trauma-informed care to our plaintiffs. And it supports the mobilization that we need to do right now to face off not just against the federal government helmed by the current administration, but now also these 19 state interveners, which is, it's more work than ever. And what I will guarantee you is that every dollar that we raise is a dollar that is going to be making history. Because in just 10 weeks, we will be at Our Children's Trust making history again. So youth plaintiffs, experts in our legal team will be in court for a first of its kind hearing. What do I mean by that? We've never seen a federal constitutional climate case get to this point before. So we're going to be fighting for an injunction that could immediately block these destructive executive orders and all of the harms that are stemming from them, the harms that are happening today, and will just continue to compound the harms that Eva and Joseph and all of their other 20 plaintiffs are feeling. And just to sort of close this out, I want to say that we do this work in states, across states, like across generations, across borders, because that's what it takes. It takes that kind of holistic, all hands on deck effort to make the change we need to see happen in this world today. And we need your partnership to keep going. And today I'll just close you with this thought, which is that you're not just fighting for legal precedent. We're fighting for the future for these young people and for future generations to come. So let me pause here and ask that we stop the recording and jump into our Q&A.